Captain Tavira Keth hated the drift. Her species, the Kethari, sensed the emotional residue of places the way other beings sense temperature. The Prospera drift was empty space, a cold null gap between the Perseus arm and the Council's frontier, and it had always felt like a held breath. For 500 standard years it had been silent, ever since the star system called Sol and its single inhabited world simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no trace, just absence where a civilization should have been. The Council of 10 Suns filed the disappearance under unresolved cosmic anomaly, and eventually stopped looking. Tavira's patrol ship, Verdant Stalker, was completing a routine sensor sweep when the navigation officer's feathers flattened against his skull. Captain Mass Shadow emerging, coordinates matching the old Sol locus. Tavira crossed the command deck, her bare feet silent on the warm living wood decking. The main holotank flickered, and she saw it, a planet resolving out of a warp fold that should not have existed. Oceans of gunmetal gray, continents scabbed with structures that ate the light. And around it, a fleet of ships shaped like frozen blade strokes, their hulls a material that registered on no spectrum her instruments could name. "Amplify external sensors," she ordered. The hulls didn't reflect starlight. They swallowed it. Looking at them made her nictitating membrane slide shut involuntarily, an ancient reflex her people had evolved against Eclipse predators. The ships were there, indisputably, and yet every passive scanner insisted they were shadows cast by nothing. Then the transmission came, no visual, just a voice, male, calm, almost tired. "You came to find us, we were waiting." The words were in flawless high Kethari. Tavira's throat tightened. Empathic perception wasn't a switch she could turn off. Every voice carried emotional flavor, and this one was wrong. It wasn't hostile, wasn't cold, it was full. As if the speaker stood at the edge of a pit so deep that his calm was the only thing keeping the listener from falling in. "Identify," she sent back, forcing her empathic shields to full. "This is Captain Tavira Keth of the Council vessel Verdant Stalker. You have emerged in a quarantine drift zone. State your origin and intent." A pause. When the voice returned, it carried a faint smile she couldn't see but could feel, a bitter, weary thing. "Origin Earth. Intent to come home. We've been away for 500 years, Captain. For us it was longer." The holotank refreshed. One of the dark ships broke formation and began a slow approach, still kilometers distant, but the sensor shadow it cast was devastating. Tavira's empathic field recoiled, not from the ship itself but from the presence inside it, a pressure, a weight of consciousness that was not one mind but millions, layered like sedimentary rock and all sharing the same colorless stillness. "They want to talk," she murmured, more to herself than her crew. "Prepare first contact protocols, and send a priority burst to the Council. Tell them Earth is back." Her tactical officer, a young Kethari whose feathers were still mottled with juvenile brown, whispered, "Captain, do we raise shields?" Tavira watched the approaching shape blot out a distant star. The darkness it carried was not an absence of light but an active presence, a thing that watched. "Keep them down," she said. "I think if they wanted to hurt us, we'd already be gone." The dark ship matched velocity and loomed beside the Verdant Stalker like a hanging cliff. A docking collar extended, made of that same non-material, and the voice returned. "Captain Keth, please come aboard, there's much you need to see." Tavira felt something reach out from that ship, something that tasted her soul as casually as she might taste the air. It was not aggressive, it was curious and hungry. She stood, smoothed her duty tunic, and walked toward the airlock. Her crew stared after her, feathers rigid with ancestral fear. As the inner hatch cycled open, she heard the human voice one more time, softer now, as if speaking only to her. "Don't be frightened. The darkness doesn't bite, not unless I ask it to." The airlock sealed behind her. Part 2. The human ship's interior was warm. That was the first shock. Tavira had expected cold metal and sterile corridors. Instead, the walls were paneled with wood, real, living wood that smelled of sap and old rain, and the lighting was a soft amber, almost domestic. The air held traces of something earthy, Soil, maybe, or dried leaves. It felt like stepping into a memory of a world she had never visited. Ambassador Wren met her in a modest reception room. He was tall by human standards, his hair dark with streaks of gray at the temples, his face lined in a way that suggested laughter had once been frequent there. He wore a simple gray tunic with no insignia. His posture was relaxed, hands clasped loosely behind his back. Everything about him was aggressively, deliberately ordinary, except his eyes. When Tavira met his gaze, her empathic field lurched. The irises were a deep brown, but behind them something moved, something that had no color and no shape and no end. Looking into Wren's eyes was like staring down a well that descended into the planet's core and kept going, past magma, past bedrock, into a void where not even heat survived. She dropped her gaze and wished she hadn't. The shadow at Wren's feet was wrong. It pooled thicker than physics allowed, and it shifted when Wren wasn't moving. "Captain Keth, thank you for coming." His voice was gentle, genuine. "I know this is a lot." "What are you?" The question escaped before protocol could catch it. She felt her feathers quiver and force them still. Wren's expression saddened. He gestured to a chair, human proportion, but she fit well enough, and sat opposite her. "We're still human," he said. "Genetically, spiritually, legally, but we're also something else now. We carry the void thought." He spoke the name with a weight that made her empathic senses feel it as a third presence in the room, a cold, slow-turning attention that had been listening all along. 500 years ago, Wren continued, Earth didn't explode or phase out, it was taken, pulled into a basal dimension by something that lives there, a consciousness made of pure absence. We call it the void thought. It isn't evil, it isn't good, it's just endless and hungry. We were drowning in it, so we made a choice. He opened his right hand, palm up. The shadow at his feet surged, coiling up his leg, pooling in his cupped fingers. It sat there, a liquid darkness that occasionally twitched as if breathing. We let it in, bonded with it. Every human alive carries a fragment of the void thought now, a symbiote that feeds on entropy and keeps us alive. In return, we anchor it to reality. We give it a shape it can't make for itself. Tavira stared at the darkness in his palm. Her empathic field screamed warnings her conscious mind couldn't articulate. Not danger, exactly, but immensity. The thing in Wren's hand was the tip of a claw the size of a nebula, and the rest of the claw was watching her through his eyes. "You brought it back with you," she whispered. "We are it now," Wren said, "and it is us. We didn't come to conquer, Captain. The galaxy has enemies worse than anything our ancestors imagined. The Vorlag swarm is coming. You know that name." She did. The Vorlag had glassed 3 Cathari colonies before her great-grandmother's time. The Council had thought them extinct. "They're not extinct," Wren said, reading her silence. "They've been building, and the void thought does not like things that waste existence without purpose." He closed his hand and the shadow dripped back to the floor, merging with his natural silhouette. "We're here to help, whether you want it or not." A tremor passed through the ship. Tavira's feathers lifted instinctively. Not an impact, something deeper, a subsonic groan from the hull. "Apologies," Wren said. "The void thought just said hello to your crew. It's curious about Cathari. Your species feels brightly." The airlock behind Tavira cycled, and she knew, without being told, that her crew had just experienced a collective moment of absolute primal dread. The presence had brushed them, tasted their minds, and withdrawn, leaving only the memory of an infinite depth. "We're not monsters," Wren said quietly. "But we're not alone anymore. Please tell the Council that, before they do something foolish." Tavira stood on legs that wanted to tremble. What happens if they do something foolish? Wren's face showed a flicker of genuine grief. The void thought protects its hosts. It doesn't ask permission, and it doesn't give warnings twice. The shadow at his feet rippled, and for an instant Tavira saw in it a shape, something with too many angles. Something that was smiling without a mouth. Then it was just a shadow again, and Ambassador Wren was offering her a cup of tea that smelled of mint and home. "Let's talk about the swarm," he said. Part 3. The Council of 10 Suns convened in the great amphitheater on Kadresh Station, a structure of spiraling glass and gravity-defying water channels. Delegates from 11 sentient species filled the concentric rings, their security details bristling with plasma lances and psionic dampeners. The arrival of the human delegation had triggered the largest defensive mobilization in Council history. Tavira stood at the center dais as a witness, her feathers still not entirely settled from her trip. Beside her, Ambassador Wren waited with 3 aides, all of them as calmly ordinary as he was, and behind each human, a shadow that didn't match the station's lighting. The speeches had been going on for 2 hours. The Tilvari demanded immediate quarantine. The Polythrix Guild proposed trade negotiations. The Edron Hierophant declared the humans a spiritual abomination and called for orbital bombardment. Wren listened to it all with the patience of someone who had spent subjective centuries learning to wait. Finally, the council speaker, a massive, antlered Bashrani named Hethker, invited the human ambassador to address the assembly. Wren rose. His shadow rose with him, pooling at his feet like a faithful hound. "You want to know if we're a threat," he began, his voice carried by the amphitheater's acoustics. "The answer is yes. We are the most dangerous thing you've ever met, but we're also the only thing standing between you and extinction." He gestured, and a hollow display bloomed above the dais. It showed footage from a human reconnaissance drone, date-stamped 3 months prior. A Vorlag swarm, thousands of bio-organic ships, their carapaces pulsing with malevolent violet light, drifted through a dead star system. "The Vorlag are 3 weeks from your border," Wren said. "They've consumed 7 uninhabited systems already, turning planetary biomass into more ships. Their hive mind spans light years, and they've evolved a psionic resonance that will shred your battle nets like wet paper." Murmuring rippled through the assembly. The Edron Hierophant stood, his gray skin flushing with outrage. "Lies. The Vorlag were destroyed." "They fled," Wren corrected. "They fled because something scared them more than your fleets, and that something is coming back." The hollow shifted. The Vorlag swarm was still there, but now a second shape entered the frame, a human ship, identical to the ones parked outside the station. It drifted toward the swarm without visible weapons, without shields, without anything except that light-drinking hull. The Vorlag attacked. Violet beams lanced out, bioplasma torpedoes, swarms of boarding pods. None of them landed. They touched the space around the human ship and simply stopped existing. Not exploded, not deflected, erased, leaving gaps in the sensor record that the computer had to interpolate. Then the human ship emitted something. The hollow couldn't render it properly. The image degraded into static and visual artifacts. When it cleared, a full quarter of the Vorlag swarm was gone. No debris, no energy signature. The remaining ships fled into faster than light, their psionic screams detectable even through the recording. The chamber was absolutely silent. Not a feather stirred, not a chitin plate clicked. "The void thought unexists things that threaten us," Wren said. "It doesn't destroy them. It removes them from causality. Those Vorlag didn't die, they never were. Their hive mind already can't remember the ships it lost. The very concept of them has been deleted." Hethker's antlers dipped low, a Bashrani gesture of deep distress. "You wield the power of a god." "I wield the power of a survivor," Wren said. "We spent 500 years in a dimension of nothing. The void thought was our oxygen, our water, our shelter. We didn't tame it, we befriended it. And now it wants to help because the Vorlag are a wound it finds offensive. They destroy without creating. They leave nothing behind but silence. The void thought abhors waste." Tavira watched the other delegates process this. She felt their emotions roiling: terror, wonder, greed, disgust. Someone was already calculating how to acquire this power. Someone else was calculating how to destroy it. "We're offering an alliance," Wren said. "Not conquest, not conversion. When the swarm hits your border, let us stand with you. After that, we'll talk about the future." The Hierophant hissed, "And if we refuse your help?" Wren's shadow stretched just slightly toward the Edron delegation. The Hierophant flinched. If you refuse, Ren said, we'll defend you anyway. The Void Thought doesn't need permission to care about something, but I'd rather do this with your trust than without it. He sat down, his shadow settled. The chamber erupted into frantic debate, and Tavira watched Ren watch the chaos with those bottomless eyes. She realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, that he wasn't worried about the council's decision. He was worried about something else, something that made even the Void Thought restless. Part 4. The Tarkathi Ascendancy had always believed problems could be solved with sufficient firepower. Their Grand Admiral, a scarred old predator named Varric Tak, had watched the council debate for exactly 4 minutes before issuing his orders. The human ships were parked in a neutral zone. Their ambassador was still inside Kadresh Station. The Void Thought, whatever it was, clearly required human hosts to act. Eliminate the hosts, capture the ships, reverse-engineer the power. Simple. 12 Tarkathi battlecruisers decloaked around the human diplomatic vessel, Evening Promise, and opened fire with everything they had. Antimatter lances, gravitic shears, quantum disruption torpedoes, weapons that could crack a continental plate. Tavira was still on the station when the alarm screamed. She rushed to an observation deck, her security detail scrambling after her, and pressed her palms against the transparent barrier. Outside, the dark human ship hung motionless, surrounded by a nimbus of dying energy. The Tarkathi barrage had struck, and then stopped striking. The antimatter bolts were simply gone, their trajectories ending in flat nothing a kilometer from the hull. The quantum torpedoes unraveled into component probabilities and vanished. The gravitic shears bent space around the ship like water around a stone, and then relaxed, harmless. The human vessel had not fired a single return shot. Instead, its shadow expanded. Tavira's empathic field convulsed. What she felt was not anger or fear from the human crew. It was something vaster and infinitely more patient, a vast attention swiveling toward the Tarkathi like a head turning to regard an insect. The Evening Promise's silhouette, already wrong, began to bleed darkness into the void. The shadow stretched, thin as a blade, and touched the nearest battlecruiser. The cruiser's running lights flickered. Its transponder signal degraded into meaningless noise. Tavira watched the ship's hull, solid durasteel, 7 meters thick, begin to fade, not from the outside in but from reality itself. Sections of the vessel simply became not there, leaving gaps of vacuum that collapsed with soft, almost apologetic flashes of displaced space. One by one, the Tarkathi ships went silent. Life sign monitors on the station showed their crews winking out, biological processes ceasing with no apparent cause. No screams, no explosions, no debris, just cessation. The final cruiser managed a partial jump to faster than light, tearing a hole in spacetime as it fled. The hole closed behind it, and Tavira saw that the ship had not escaped. The jump conduit had been severed partway, and half the vessel was now scattered across 11 light-years as a fine mist of atoms that had forgotten they were ever part of a starship. The shadow withdrew. The Evening Promise resumed its quiet orbit, entirely undamaged. Tavira's communicator crackled. Ambassador Ren's voice, calm but weary, filled the observation deck. Captain Keth, please inform the Council that the Tarkathi Ascendancy is now down to 3 battlecruisers. The crews won't remember what they were doing here. We've excised their short-term memory of the attack. We don't want a war. You killed over 4,000 sentient beings, Tavira heard herself say. The pause that followed was heavy with something she couldn't name, grief, resignation. The Void Thought doesn't see death the way we do, Ren said at last. To it, existence is a loan. It called in the debt. I'm sorry, I truly am. But the Tarkathi made their choice and the Void Thought protects its own. It's not a weapon we can holster. It's a partner we can sometimes restrain. The communicator clicked off. Tavira stared at the empty space where 12 warships had been, and her empathic senses felt the lingering imprint of that vast, patient attention. It was not satisfied. It was not remorseful. It was simply, still hungry and waiting for something larger to challenge it. She returned to the council chamber to find the Hierophant silent for the first time in his life, the Tilvari ambassador weeping openly, and Speaker Hethker signing an emergency mutual defense packed with trembling digits. The Vorlag swarm had just become everyone's second greatest fear. Part 5. The border system of Kelvareth burned. Vorlag bioships, shaped like cancerous crustaceans the size of cities, poured through the system's weak point, a gravity eddy where defensive platforms couldn't anchor. The Council's combined fleet, Cathari, Bashrani, Polythrix, even the remnants of the Tarkathi, threw itself into the breach with desperate courage. Plasma lances carved burning lines across carapace hulls. Psionic dampeners strained to block the Vorlag hive scream. Boarding parties fought and died in corridors that bled corrosive ichor. It wasn't enough. Tavira, commanding the Verdant Stalker from the fleet's rear echelon, watched the tactical display compress into a nightmare of red. The Vorlag had adapted. Their bioships were regenerating faster than the fleet could damage them, absorbing energy and converting it into fresh armor. Their psionic attacks were evolving mid-battle, finding new frequencies to bypass the dampeners. Crews on 3 Council cruisers had already gone mad, turning their own weapons on Allied ships before being vented into space. "We're losing," her tactical officer said, voice flat with the calm of someone who had already accepted death. Then the dark ships arrived. They didn't emerge from faster than light. They were simply there, as if the universe had blinked and forgotten they hadn't always occupied that patch of space. 12 human vessels, shaped like frozen blades of absence, slid into formation between the Council fleet and the advancing swarm. A 13th ship, larger than the rest, took the center position and opened a channel. Ambassador Wren's face appeared on the fleet-wide comm, grainy and calm. "All Council forces, pull back to the secondary defense line. We'll handle the forward engagement." "You're outnumbered 1,000 to 1, Hethker's voice protested. "Numbers don't matter to the Void Thought. Only meaning does. Please pull back. The null field has a wide radius and we don't want any of you caught in it." The Council fleet retreated, battered and bleeding. Tavira kept the Verdant Stalker close enough to observe, overriding her crew's terrified objections. She needed to see. She needed to understand what humanity had become. The human ships moved forward. The Vorlag swarm, scenting prey, surged to meet them with a psionic howl that rattled Tavira's teeth even through the hull. Bioplasma torrents, continent-cracking beams, clouds of ravenous boarding organisms. The swarm unleashed everything. The dark ships' shadows expanded. They merged, becoming a single penumbra that blotted out the stars behind the fleet. The null field activated, and Tavira's empathic senses screamed as she felt reality itself flinch. The Vorlag front line ceased. Capital ships the size of mountains, packed with millions of hive minds, simply became non-events. Their existence was unwritten, their histories collapsing into a paradox that the universe resolved by never having let them exist in the first place. Tavira watched a dreadnought bioship, a thing that had terrorized the Perseus Arm for 8 millennia, vanish so completely that she couldn't even remember what color its carapace had been. The swarm recoiled. For the first time in its ancient existence, it met something that could not be fought, only endured. But one vessel held. A Vorlag megaship, a bloated monarch beast covered in pulsating psionic organs, pushed through the null field. It was shielded by a resonance of pure hatred, a psionic frequency so primitive and violent that even the Void Thought paused, curious, like a predator examining unfamiliar prey. The human flagship's shadow contracted. A small craft launched from its docking bay, a boarding torpedo aimed directly at the megaship's flank. It punched through the carapace and burrowed deep. "Voidwalker team deployed," Wren's voice announced, soft and almost sad. "Captain Keth, you may want to observe this. You'll want to understand what our soldiers actually are." Tavira magnified the visual feed. The megaship's interior was dark, hot, organic. The boarding torpedo's hatch blew open, and 5 figures emerged. They wore armor that absorbed light the same way their ships did, and they moved with a fluidity that spoke of something guiding their steps beyond mere training. The lead figure reached up and disengaged her helmet. Her face was human, young, with high cheekbones and a scar across her jaw. Her hair was cropped short, matted with sweat, and her eyes were pits of absolute absence, the same as Ren's but sharper, more focused, more hungry. The shadow at her feet was alive. It coiled and snapped at the air, tasting the megaship's psionic aura and finding it wanting. She drew no weapon. She didn't need one. "I am Sergeant Myra Calder," she said, and the Vorlag hive mind heard her across every synapse of its distributed consciousness. "I walk with the void. Your existence offends it. Run and be unwritten." The hive mind screamed back, a psionic assault that would have liquefied a normal human brain. Myra Calder smiled, not a predatory smile, but something gentler and far more terrifying, the expression of someone greeting an old, familiar pain. The shadow surged forward, and the megaship's interior began to disappear. Part 6. Myra Calder walked through the megaship's pulsing arteries like a woman strolling through a garden. The Vorlag threw everything at her team. Bioforms erupted from the walls, clawed, fanged, spitting acid and psionic static. The Void Thought erased them before they fully materialized, flickering them out of existence in mid-lunge. Bulkheads sealed and then unsealed as the darkness rewrote the ship's organic circuitry. Gravity inverted, normalized, inverted again, and the strike team adjusted without breaking stride, their bond with the void allowing them to move in directions that geometry didn't recognize. Her 4 squadmates, all bearing the same lightless eyes, spread out to secure the ship's vital nodes. Myra headed for the core. The Overmind was there, waiting. She could feel it, a pressure behind her eyes, a greasy touch against the inside of her skull. The Overmind was old. It had consumed the consciousness of 1,000 species, drunk the dying thoughts of entire civilizations. It knew fear the way a butcher knows meat, something to be processed, not experienced. And now it was afraid. The chamber at the megaship's heart was a cathedral of flesh, its walls lined with neural tissue that glowed a sick violet. The Overmind floated at the center, a shapeless mass of telepathic matter that extruded temporary sensory organs as she approached. A single, vast eye opened, its pupil contracting as it focused on the small human figure. "You carry a thing that should not be," the Overmind projected, its mental voice the chorus of every mind it had ever devoured. "I am eternal. I have outlived stars. Your void will pass and I will remain." Myra stopped 10 meters from the pulsing mass. The shadow at her feet rippled and rose, forming a cloak of absolute dark around her shoulders. "You misunderstand," she said. "The Void Thought isn't something we carry, it's something we are, and it's been waiting a very long time for something exactly like you." The Overmind attacked, not with claws or plasma, with pure psionic domination, a lance of ego the size of a planet's consciousness, designed to overwrite any mind it touched. It flooded Myra's neural pathways with 500,000 years of accumulated anguish, the death screams of 100 sentient races, the despair of gods and the terror of infants. Myra didn't resist. She opened herself completely and let the Overmind fall into the Void Thought inside her. The Overmind screamed, not a psionic broadcast, a physical sound, the megaship's flesh convulsing as its master experienced something no living mind had ever survived. The Void Thought was not darkness. Darkness was an absence of light. The Void Thought was an absence of existence, a depth that had no bottom, a silence that had no edge. It was the thing that existed before the first universe ignited and the thing that would remain after the last star guttered out. And it was infinitely, impossibly patient. The Overmind saw eternity, and eternity looked back with Myra Calder's eyes. "You fed on death for so long you forgot what dying actually means," Myra whispered. "Let me remind you." The shadow consumed the Overmind. Not quickly, not mercifully. The Void Thought was not merciful. It unwrote the Overmind layer by layer, peeling back its stolen memories, its accumulated identities, its borrowed ego, until nothing remained but a single, terrified, primordial consciousness that had forgotten it was ever part of a swarm. And then it unwrote that too. Throughout the megaship and the entire Vorlag fleet, Every hive-linked mind felt its central intelligence simply stop existing. The psionic network collapsed. Bioships drifted, mindless. Attack organisms dissolved into inert protoplasm. The swarm, an entity that had terrorized the galaxy since before most of these stars were born, became a scattered collection of decaying meat. Myra Calder walked out of the megaship's core, her shadow sated and still. Her team regrouped, their mission complete. The extraction shuttle docked, and she climbed aboard without looking back. Later, on the Verdenstalker, Tavira found her standing alone in an observation lounge, watching the human fleet clean up the remnants. The sergeant's helmet was off again, those terrible eyes fixed on the stars. "You're the one who made first contact," Myra said without turning. "Captain Keth." "Yes." "You felt it," the void thought. "You know what we are now." Tavira's feathers lay flat, a sign of submission she couldn't suppress. "I know you're powerful. I know you saved us." Myra turned. Her expression was not proud or fierce. It was exhausted, and underneath the exhaustion, something that might have been grief. "We didn't choose this," she said. "Earth was drowning in a dimension of nothing. The void thought was the only thing that noticed us, the only thing that offered a way out." She held up her hand, her shadow pooled in her palm, that same breathing darkness Ren had shown Tavira days ago. "Every human alive carries a piece of it. We're never alone, never truly quiet. It loves us in its way, and we love it, but love doesn't make it safe." She closed her hand and the shadow dripped away. "We came back because the swarm was only the beginning. The void thought is a fragment, a splinter. Something much larger sent it into our dimension, and that something has been looking for it." Tavira's blood chilled. "Larger." "The source," Myra said. "The entity that pulled Earth into the null in the first place. It's been patient for 500 years, but now that the void thought has fed so openly, it knows where we are, and it's coming." The observation lounge's lights dimmed, as if the shadow had heard its name and stirred. "Get your council ready, Captain," Myra said. "The swarm was a skirmish. The real fight starts soon." Part 7. The anomaly appeared on deep space monitors 3 days later. It wasn't a ship or a fleet. It was a wound, a tear in the fabric of spacetime that bled pure non-existence into the galactic medium. Telescopes trained on the coordinates showed nothing, and then less than nothing, a creeping absence that swallowed the light of background galaxies as it advanced. The source was coming. Ambassador Ren stood before the Council of 10 Suns for what he knew would be the final time. His shadow, usually so controlled, writhed at his feet with something that almost resembled eagerness. "The entity that took Earth 500 years ago is returning," he said. "It created the void thought as a lure, a piece of itself that it could sense across dimensions. The plan was always to retrieve it, and to consume whatever reality it had attached itself to in the process. We stopped being bait the moment we bonded with it. We became stewards." Speaker Hethker's antlers drooped. "Can this thing be fought?" "Not fought, trapped." Ren activated the central hollow. It showed Earth gray and scarred, orbited by the entire human fleet. "We've spent 500 years, subjective, transforming our homeworld into a prison dimension. Every human carries the void thought, and that makes us a key. When the source arrives, we will use our bond to lure it into the containment matrix at Earth's core. The void thought fragments will act as seals, holding the door shut." The Hierophant, still subdued after the Tarkathy incident, spoke quietly. "What happens to the fragments? To your people?" Ren's face showed something the Council had never seen on a human: open, unshielded grief. "The bond must be severed. The void thought symbiotes will be drawn into the prison along with the source. Every human alive will lose the companion that has kept us alive for centuries. We'll be ordinary again, mortal, vulnerable." Tavira, standing in her usual place, felt her empathic field ache. She understood now. The darkness wasn't a weapon the humans wielded. It was a friend. A terrible, hungry, infinitely patient friend, and they were about to sacrifice it to protect a galaxy that had feared and hated them. "Why?" she heard herself ask. "Why do this for us?" Ren looked at her with those bottomless eyes, eyes that in a few hours would be simply brown. because someone should live in the light, and because humanity has always been very good at carrying things no one else wants to carry. The human fleet formed a sphere around Earth. The source arrived, a presence so vast that sensors couldn't measure it, only register the space where everything else had stopped existing. It was not malevolent. Malevolence required intention, and the source was older than intention, older than the concept of concepts. It simply was, and its nature was to consume. The containment sequence began. Across Earth, in cities built from memories of old architecture, in orbital habitats, in the ships forming the defensive sphere, every human stopped what they were doing and made peace with their shadow. The Void Thought symbiote stirred, understanding through the bond what was about to happen. There was no struggle, no refusal. The relationship between humanity and the Void had never been master and servant. It was partnership, and partners sometimes had to say goodbye. Tavira watched from the verdant stalker as the first seal activated. A shaft of pure black erupted from Earth's north pole, lancing into the approaching source. The entity paused, curious, and then moved toward the shaft as a fish moves toward a baited hook. It recognized its own fragment, multiplied across billions of human souls, and it wanted them back. Myra Calder stood on a hill in what had once been Montana, her hand resting on her own shadow. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The shadow coiled around her fingers, a farewell embrace, and then it pulled away, drawn toward the sky in a column of silent darkness. The sensation was like losing a limb and a lover and a lifelong memory all at once. Myra fell to her knees, gasping, her eyes suddenly just eyes, green, ordinary, brimming with tears she hadn't been able to cry for centuries. Across the globe, billions of humans experienced the same severance. Some screamed, some wept, some simply lay down and pressed their faces to the dirt, feeling sunlight on their skin in a way they had forgotten existed. Ambassador Wren, standing on the bridge of his flagship, watched his own shadow peel away and join the torrent pouring toward the source. His knees buckled. An aide caught him. "It's done," he managed. "It's quiet, it's so quiet inside my head." The source entered the trap. Earth's core, laced with 500 years of paracausal engineering, folded the entity into a pocket dimension and sealed shut. The last of the Void Thought fragments slid into place as a lock, and the dimensional tier above the solar system healed with a sound that wasn't sound, a sensation of rightness that rippled across light years. The source was imprisoned. Earth remained scarred and ordinary, and humanity was, for the first time in half a millennium, alone inside their own minds. Tavira's fleet escorted the human ships back to the Council's borders. There were no celebrations. The humans were too raw, too fragile. The galaxy looked at them and saw not monsters, but something more complicated. People who had walked through an unimaginable darkness and come out the other side, leaving pieces of themselves behind. A week later, Wren stood on Kadresh Station's observation deck, looking at the stars with unaugmented eyes. Tavira joined him, her feathers relaxed for the first time since this all began. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Blind," Wren said, "deaf, hollow, and free." He turned to her and his smile was watery but real. "We carried the night so you could have the dawn, that's the deal. That's always been the deal." Tavira didn't know what to say, so she simply stood with him, watching the distant glimmer of a star called Sol. A star that had vanished 500 years ago and returned carrying darkness. A darkness that had, in the end, been a gift. Earth vanished, and when it returned, darkness walked beside it. But darkness, it turned out, could love. And what it loved, it protected, even at the cost of itself. The galaxy would not forget.